Hello, everybody. It is great to be here again today. My name is Gary Fowler, and I am the CEO, co-founder, and president of GSD Get Shit Done Venture Studios, a premier AI and quantum venture studio located in the heart of Silicon Valley in Palo Alto. I've been involved in technology companies for over 35 years. I've been involved in several unicorns. I was on the original management team at Click Software, which was sold to Salesforce for $1.35 billion. Love artificial intelligence and quantum computing, and love making the world a little bit better place. And as Steve Jobs said, let's all put a little dent in it. And with that, I've got my friend. He's worked as an advisor, a mentor, lawyer. I mean, all kinds of different realms. All around good guy, an incredible bag of knowledge, incredible knowledge from all over the world, helping companies go global. Stan Lewandowski with Pillsbury. Hi, Stan.
Hi, Gary. Pleasure to be on your show. Thank you for a great invite, and I look forward to chatting with you about great things in the next half an hour.
No, it's super. It's great to have you here. So I got a question, Stan. How does somebody that goes to University at Copernicus and, move down through and go to University for Law in the U.S., but how did you make that transition? What is one day you woke up and said, oh, I'm going to go from Copernicus to California? How did that work?
It's a great question, and I think I'm not so novel in my approach. There have been many people who traveled that road. So I've been interested in exploring Silicon Valley for about 5 years prior to my first trip to this region. So I read a lot about what was going on in 1990s in Silicon Valley. And I simply one day, not that I woke up one day, but I think there was one day where I really sat down and I decided that one day after I'm done with all the things that have to happen on the European side, I would go to the US and become a premier lawyer for companies that also one day will travel from different places around the globe to Silicon Valley. And that's where I am today, in the heart of Silicon Valley in Palo Alto. And I truly have enjoyed the last 20 years working with so many excellent founders, because before we talk about companies, it's all about the founders, right? And many of the founders I've worked with, they are also globetrotters, brave people coming from pretty much every single place on earth. I will admit I don't have clients from the 7th continent, but it's too cold over there, so we need to wait for that.
You never know, though, Stan. You just never know, do you? So I got a question. So you went to Cambridge, and how did you physically go to the UK, or did you do it online, or how did that work?
I went a few times to Cambridge throughout the 2-year period, but most of my professors came actually to Europe, and that's what the Cambridge professors have been doing for now over, I think, 2.5 decades. They go to different universities around Europe and teach students European law and English law, and that was instrumental in my quick understanding of how things were done in the US, because with that background, it was much easier to go to law school in the US and simply walk into a contracts class or securities class and simply say, wow, this is my second home. I understand most of it. So I could even say that some subjects were much easier to comprehend for someone who came from a completely different system, because most European countries are based on civil law versus common law, just like UK or the US, but that was very helpful.
How hard was the transition? Did you have to take the LSATs to come over and go to law school here, or did they accept your university degree? How did that work?
Pretty much for my law school, the requirements were that you are an excellent student from a law school abroad, and that you have a law degree from an institution outside the US. And then once you have that, then with the application package, you have to really prove to the school that you are worthy of, I think, the US education. And once that's done, you can take 1 or 2, or sometimes people take 3 bar exams. So that's a license to practice law in a given jurisdiction in the US if you want to practice state law. And once that's done, you can apply for jobs and become a lawyer. So in many cases, People who come from overseas are admitted as lawyers much, much faster in the US compared to their home jurisdiction, where a few years after law school, they still have to go through apprenticeship and a few other obstacles have to be overcome before they can truly call themselves a lawyer.
Maybe it's better to go abroad to law school and then come back, huh?
Many people do that. Many people do that.
No, that's great. And so you went down, you did that, and then when did you decide, like, I'm going to move to Silicon Valley? Did you have one of these a revelation one day and say, I'm going to come to the Valley? What made you decide to come to Silicon Valley?
That's pretty much about 25 years ago. I've made my mind at that time, and it was just then the execution stage, right? So like with everything else, it's good to have time. If you have many months or years in front of you, you can plan and then execute as just an easy plan. If you need to do things tomorrow, that's much more, I think, complicated. So I decided to do that when I was done with half of my legal education in Europe. And then it was just preparation for the next 2.5 years, both on the academic side. So again, keep up the good grades and those things. Plus, US is not the cheapest place on earth. You need to really start thinking about how you will be able to go to the US. And that's not easy for most. That's why, in my case, I needed 2.5 years to really get that part of my pre-trip things done, and then I was ready.
No, that's great. And then you work for a smaller law firm, right? Lewis, I believe. Forget
Yeah.
Lewis.
It's a Lewis, Brisbois, Bisgard, and Smith. It's an LA-based firm with national footprint in the US. Mostly does litigation. So for the first few years, because of the big internet bubble that burst 2 decades ago, the corporate law wasn't as thriving as it is today, and many younger lawyers had to at least reposition themselves and change their plans, at least for the initial few years. And I became a litigator for a few years. And then when the economy improved and more and more people saw influx of companies from mostly the East Coast going to the West Coast, many openings for those law firms appeared in different media. And I decided that it was time to leave the litigation part of my life behind me and use that experience to my client's advantage and become a corporate lawyer full time. And that's what happened now over 15 years ago.
And how was it, in 2001? So you came right up about the time of the, we had the dotcom bubble in March of 2000, and then we
Yes.
had 9/11. How was it then, Stan, in Silicon Valley?
I actually had my American friends with me on 9/11. We were sitting in a Polish city, Poznan, at today's Skoda/Volkswagen facility. And a gentleman who is now retired, lives in Florida. He served in US Navy for years. He was sitting next to me and simply crying. And I told him, hey, Gary, his name was Gary too.
I thought you were talking to me for a second.
Yeah. So Gary was crying, and I said, hey, in a few months I will be in the US, and hopefully the US will kind of overcome all the bad things that are happening right now. And it was tough time, end of 2001, 2002, still the job market for corporate lawyers wasn't as great as one would expect, but that was, in my view, the perfect time to go and get your legal education while the job market is kind of getting ready for you. So once that was done, I think I nicely transitioned from law school into the legal profession without too much of complicated, I would say, life at the beginning. And then things were just getting better and better. And now it's 2021, 20 years later. I'm very happy that I am where I am.
So you go down through 2000, you've seen a lot of changes, ups and downs and ins and outs of Silicon Valley. So have you gone down through and see this, you've seen the metamorphosis, what's happening now? What's different from, 2002, say, and coming out of the 9/11 till today? What do you see is different about the Valley?
The Valley itself has not changed so much. The buildings are, in some places, there are newer buildings, but it's not the Valley of 1960s or 70s, right, where the pioneers were really building the first buildings and the innovation was just thriving, but slowly. So I think the last 2 decades, we just see more and more people coming, in my view, more and more people coming from different parts of the world and trying to explore Silicon Valley. It's easier to communicate with your relatives and other people who you want to stay in touch with. In 2000 or 2001, we did not have the opportunities and different technologies available to us today to really stay in touch with people far away. And many people, there are some jurisdictions where that's incredibly important, whether it's family or attachment to specific food and other things. So now you can drive to work and communicate with your brother or sister or parents or grandparents if you have them. But on the technology side, I see more and more companies that have decided to come to this Mecca, even though some other people claim that there are different Silicon Valleys being built in different parts of the world, but I don't think that during our lifetime we'll see another sandhill built somewhere, whether it's Dubai or some other jurisdiction. It's just explosion of different new technologies, new founders building extraordinary things. And in many cases, we see them working for bigger companies first, and then they separate and simply say, now it's time, because I'm 32, now it's the time to build something on my own. And I have many, many stories like this. The founders that I've worked with, founders who are just personal friends, they work with somebody else, that's all fine. But that's, for me, it's just incredible place, because nobody feels in Silicon Valley that you do not belong to this place. You are part of the ecosystem. Everybody is from somewhere, whether it's another state or another country or far, far away country. It's much, much easier to collaborate, feel that you are part of something unique. And then you can use this experience and share when you go to other places and just tell other people how things are really done in this place. And with today's technology, just like we are doing today, it's much, much easier to do this remotely without really going and being in one or another place on Earth. It takes time and money. So we can do this much, much faster these days.
Yeah, so you're right. I remember with Click Software, we brought it over here in 1998, 99. And from Israel, when I was on the original team, I remember doing the IPO and going through and having to call people up on the phone to talk. And, I don't even remember if I had to use Skype at that time, actually. But I remember how difficult, but you're right, the digital transformation's upon us. And the beauty and the enchantment of Silicon Valley is there's so many incredible things happen. And you can walk down the street and El Camino Real and see Tim Cook in a Starbucks or Zuckerberg. It's not like they're not there. It's really a magical place. So in terms of the valuations, from your standpoint, Stan, I mean, it seems like the valuations, when I talk to folks in India or China or Nigeria, all over Africa, the valuations are just a lot higher. Why is that?
I think, again, from my perspective, there is much more money in the marketplace. At the same time, you will see founders complaining that they cannot raise $250,000 or $500,000, and that will remain. For the initial people starting things on their own for the first time, it's going to be tough. Not everybody will be successfully funded the moment they say, we are XYZ. But the companies that really have sophisticated teams in many cases built by serial entrepreneurs, people who had 1 or 2 exits in the past or were with great companies in the 7th, 8th position. They learn from great founders who then simply gave them the wings they need now to build their own businesses. And I think we are changing just so many things. When you look mostly at the AI space, fintech, I have clients in many different industries, but AI and fintech the last 3-4 years, this is something that you would not even think that those things would be happening. If you take just the financial side, the whole decentralized finance, all of those NFTs that people are talking about, the crypto world, people who are 25 are just much more experienced than someone who is 45 and 50. People are buying, staking, doing so many other things. They don't even say, I get some rewards for my activities. They say, I was just staking my token, right? And if you don't really know what's going on, you will not really follow the conversation with them. So we see, I think, a big change, and this change will be happening more and more in the coming years. It's somehow I'm just fascinated by what I see specifically in the finance side, because again, people who were artists 5-7 years ago, someone could disregard them that, hey, what are you going to do? Just animate things. And suddenly in 2017-18, they started doing virtual characters somewhere online. They had nice campaigns. And now when you look at some companies, whether it's the NBA Top Shots or whatever you are watching, right? This is just bringing so much attention to the public space. And I think there are moments when you read about huge prices paid for certain things, for certain assets, and that just drives more and more people just to educate themselves about something new. So we'll see how it goes, but you are absolutely right. The valuations, even when I look at 2007, 2008, before the Lehman Brothers collapsed, and we will be doing Series A and calling a $3.5 million round, a nice Series A. Now you just say, hey, that's just a small seed, and let's do a 15 or 17A. When you go higher and higher, companies that were 2 years ago valued at 50 million, now they are saying, oh, we are now 750. Things that you would not really see happening 15 years ago. So we'll see again the accretive nature of those businesses, and then the money pours over from so many directions. So people are simply, in many cases, just asking for a tiny place at the table so they can be on the successful ride, because these companies will not end with 10 or $20 million valuation. Look at Stripe. A year ago, people were saying, oh, wow, it's a $30 billion company. You say, hello, 2021, oh, it's 95. I think this will continue to go into a kind of
stratosphere
space. Yes, stratosphere, and it's still a private company, right?
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And, you look at it, but here's the other challenge. You look at the world around us, Dan, there's 49 zettabytes of data on the planet Earth. If you took DVDs or CDs, and I've said this many times, and stacked them one on top of another, it would go 35 times between Earth and the moon. We're truly in a state of infobesity, and it's grown at 68% per year. So the challenge is, if we look at StreamYard, founded in 2018, Zoom, I remember when I was one of the early Zoom users 6 years ago, and people were laughing, saying, why would I use Zoom? I have Skype, because it's a lot better. And so these technologies have really brought us together, around the world. It's so much easier to do business. And then 2 years ago, when the pandemic started and we started to see what was happening over in China, and then it really spread to the rest of the world, we understood that we still need to stay open for business. And it definitely a change in the cultures around the world to be able to look at using a Zoom or a StreamYard to do your business. But people adapt very quickly. The digital transformation 3 years ago, McKinsey said that within the next 10 years, 93% of the companies around the world will go through the digital transformation. But that had to happen in a matter of months in order to survive. And that's the beauty of humanity, because we do believe in dreams, and we do adapt. And using these technologies to level the playing field and really democratize opportunities has really been beautiful. So now we see companies, I know at GSD, from all over the world that have come in with incredible technologies, whether it's artificial intelligence or quantum computing. But I got to tell you, I had a call yesterday with one of the wealthiest families in the world. And one of the things they said to me, and I want to, be interesting to get your opinion is, we want to invest in companies, but we only want to invest in U.S. companies. So if they just open up a office in the U.S., what does it mean? How are we assured we're not going to lose our money? And so this is from one of the wealthiest families in the U.S., a direct conversation, right? What is that? I mean, this is like, on one side, it almost sounds like a Stone Age approach. But how do we address those because that's where it is, right? Silicon Valley is a port to the rest of the world. And these companies come here because they have a dream and they have hope and they want to change their lives. So how do we assure some of these ultra high net worth families and the venture funds that it's okay?
Yeah. So first thing, if people are talking really about investments in a startup, or we now call them emerging growth companies, right? Even though it's still below $1 billion in revenues, you have to assume that you may lose the entire investment. That's kind of the premise. And every financing document will say, hey, you may lose all of your investment. So some people who are more conservative, I've seen them coming in and setting up shops in the US, or being very close to the US, in Cayman or some other jurisdictions, and they will only touch Series B and higher companies. So even though they might be investing at pre-money valuation of 100 or 150, sometimes higher, the risk is much, much lower than investing $5 million into a $15 million Series A, when you have, let's say, a greater risk associated with that stage where the company is at the time. So I have clients like that. I see them progressing, I would say, lower with time when they make successful investments and see that Series A is also okay. But there are mishaps from time to time, and there are companies that only return bits of the invested capital to people who invested at the Series A or later stage. Again, we see in the media mostly the successful stories, right? But believe me, there are also less fortunate stories to share.
Yeah, I had somebody that, it was yesterday, the day before, said that they had a chance to invest in one of the early electric car companies. And they were saying, well, the original founder of that company, they invested. One of them did, one of them didn't. But it was only till recently that they actually got their money back, because as they invested early, it was so up and down and in and out, right? And then Elon Musk and other folks come around, depending on the car company. It's interesting how that works. So when these companies come to the U.S., so they're from all over the world, from Latin America, from Eastern Europe, and they come over here and they have a dream. How do they get set up, Stan? I mean, what's the best way to do it? I mean, people say Delaware corporations with an office, an entity in Silicon Valley. What's the best way, or what's the normal way that people do it, that these companies do it?
Great question, Gary. And most companies will come to the US and set up as Delaware corporations with offices in different jurisdictions, whether it's Illinois or California or some other place. Most of my clients come to Silicon Valley or San Francisco. But there are some clients I have who do not necessarily come to do business in the US directly through a Delaware entity. They go to Cayman, and then through Cayman, they expand into the US only because that's better to optimize things for them. So when I talk to companies from Europe, the discussion will be different than the discussion I'm having with someone from South America. There are different characteristics we have to address, but the initial deal is always to evaluate what's already been done, where the other company or companies are, and structure this in my view, in the most optimal way for the founding team, right? That's how you build foundations. But you are absolutely right. Definitely 90 out of 100 companies that are set up in the US that will go to Delaware, and that's the right jurisdiction. That's pretty much the jurisdiction for companies to be in.
And why did they go to Delaware, Stan? Is it because of the body of corporate law, or why is it?
Yes, you are absolutely right. This is the most developed corporate law in the US. And again, this is all state law. So other states are to some extent learning from the justices of the Chancery Court. It's a specific court in Delaware that deals only with corporate matters, and then other judges who adjudicate things on the corporate front in other jurisdictions, whether it's California or some other states, are definitely noticing different trends and interpretations. So I would say this is the set of professors that are teaching college students ruling in some other places. And with that law and the treatment of different matters in a way that we can predict things, all the investors will always be interested in a body of law that gives them almost a certain response before we actually have a problem, right? So we can address things by saying, this will likely be XYZ, rather than, we don't know, could be A or B, and that's not really acceptable for many investors.
How important is it, if you look at bringing a company to Silicon Valley, what are the benefits of doing that in terms of, you get a company, you see a lot of them coming out in terms of investability, if you will. Does it have an impact on investability or not?
It really depends. The older I am, the more I see, and I think many things that I've seen have taught me that you do not necessarily have to be in a given space or given place to get investment. You can beat someone when you are outside Silicon Valley, but you are planning to be there in a year or two. But your team, your product is so global, you can be selling things from overseas, but you still have the US structure, right? So the investment comes to the US and you make sales, but it's much greater for connections with different people. The whole network is just next door, whether it's the VCs or mentors or people who help startups at the early stage, just like you guys as GSD. So many people who come from other places do not necessarily understand how the puzzles have to be put together, and they lack the experience, the business experience. They can be excellent coders, technicians, but then someone else needs to really lead them through the initial phase and show them how things are done the Silicon Valley way, right? Because nobody wants to build a company for 10, 15 years. You want to build something in 5, 7 years. You want to have an exit so you can relax a little bit and start building another one. Now, with that experience and just the stamina that comes with a successful venture that you built, you exited, and now you can build another one. So I think many things can be said about that aspect.
No, it's great, Stan. Listen, we're coming to the end of the show. Closing thoughts, and how do people get a hold of you?
You can connect via LinkedIn. That's the easiest way to find me. From time to time, I have different posts about what I do or what my colleagues do or what my firm does. I will always be very happy to have individual conversations with people who need some assistance with the global issues they are dealing with. So today, it's not that difficult to find someone. You can always find me, and I will definitely get back to you very quickly.
That's great. So to startups out there, to the investors, Stan is one of the best that I know. He's direct and to the point. He's been around the block a few times. He's really, he's been incredibly helpful to startups that we've dealt with, that we deal with, and companies that I've co-founded. He is an incredible lawyer. I highly recommend it. He works for a firm called Pillsbury, world-renowned firm. And, no BS, direct and to the point. So I just love it. So I'd like to say to each and every one of you, thank you for coming and tuning into another edition of the Founders Report with Gary Fowler. I appreciate it, Stan. It's a pleasure, as always, to have you on the show. Thank you, Javier, and thanks to the entire VCTV team for making the Founders Report possible. Stay tuned. We'll be back again in 2 weeks with another edition. Stay happy, stay safe, and stay healthy.
Thank you so much, Gary, for having me on. Bye-bye.